Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this fabulous session, Books and Coffee with Suad Amiry and Malini Schueller. My name is Bill Mullen. I'm with the Palestine Writes Organizing Committee. We're so happy you're here this morning. My job is very simple. I'm going to introduce you to the moderator for this morning's conversation, who is Malini Schueller. Malini is a professor in the Department of English at the University of Florida, where she teaches courses on U.S. empire studies, comparative settler colonialism, and Asian American studies. She's the author of several books, The Politics of Voice, Liberalism and Social Criticism, From Franklin to Kingston, U.S. Orientalisms, Race, Nation, and Gender in Literature, 1790 to 1890, Locating Race, Global Sites of Postcolonial Citizenship, and Campaigns of Knowledge, U.S. Pedagogies of Colonialism and Occupation in the Philippines and Japan. She has also co-edited Exceptional State, Contemporary U.S. Culture and the New Imperialism and Dangerous Professors. She is a member of the Organizing Collective for U.S. ACBI, the United States Campaign for the Academic and Cultural Boycott of Israel. At the University of Florida, she is faculty advisor for Students for Justice in Palestine. And in 2019, she was selected to participate in a faculty development seminar by the Palestinian American Research Council. So welcome, Malini.
Thank you, Bill, for that introduction. As Bill said, I'm on the organizing committee for Palestine Writes, the festival that you all have been enjoying for the last 3 days. We have 2 more days of this festival, but please remember that the entire festival is recorded. You can right now see what you have missed or what you might have missed on Wednesday. I believe Wednesday and Thursday recordings are already available live. You just have to go on to the hall where the original session was supposed to be, and there you will be able to click on the sessions that you might have missed. Also, in addition to the festival, we offer a lot of other things. If you go to the ACA showroom, you can see our booksellers and our vendors, visit them. In the lobby, if you click on the art exhibit, you can see the beautiful paintings and also browse through them. They're also available for purchase. There's also the official bookstore, and all the books that the writers here have written are available at that bookstore, including the books of Suad Amiry. And also you can go to the lounge and write on the graffiti wall, and what you have written will be archived and presented. For this session, please know that if you need translation, there is a button here on the right-hand side, at the bottom right-hand side of the screen called Interpretation. You can click on that, and there's simultaneous translation from English to Arabic and Arabic to English. So please do that. You can also ask question and answers if you put in on the Q&A at the bottom, and Suad will be happy to answer those questions. Before I introduce Suad here, I do want to share this very sad news that happened yesterday. Yesterday, Israeli troops shot dead a 13-year-old boy, Ali Ayman Nasar Abu Aliyah, in the village of Mukahir in the West Bank. Israeli troops used live rounds to attack protests against an illegal settlement in the area, and 4 other people were wounded. So I do want to take a minute to remember the tragedies that continue to happen. But for the moment, as we have this tragedy, it is my great pleasure to welcome and introduce Suad Amiry. Suad is a conservation architect and a writer. She is the founder of Riwaq, Center for Architectural Conservation in Ramallah, Palestine. Suad taught architecture at Jordan and Birzeit University. She is the author of numerous books on architecture, including Space, Kinship, and Gender, the Social Dimension of Peasant Architecture in Palestine. She is also the author of the acclaimed memoir, Sharon and my mother-in-law, which actually began, as she told me, as a series of emails that was sent to a friend of hers in Italy. And the emails must have been so superb that the friend compiled them together, sent them to a publisher who immediately accepted them. And as you might or might not know, this book was translated into 19 languages and received Italy's renowned literary award, Via Reggio, in 2004. Suad is also the author of numerous nonfiction books, including Menopausal Palestine, Nothing to Lose But Your Life, An 18-Hour Journey with Murad, and Golda Slept Here. Suad's latest book, which we'll be discussing today, is My Damascus. It's a wonderfully hybrid work of collective memory. It is a travel narrative, a history of space, of 3 generations of Palestinian women from the late 19th century to the present day, as they negotiate their lives amidst social and political change. My Damascus has been published in Italian and Arabic, and it'll be published in English in the US by Interlink in spring 2021. So you can pre-order My Damascus, but you can order all the other books at the bookstore. Suad has also been a member of a Palestinian peace delegation in Washington, DC, and is engaged in some major peace initiatives of Palestinian and Israeli women. She has done radio interviews for the BBC and has also appeared on TED Talks. So it's my pleasure to welcome Suad. And Suad would like to start by narrating her thoughts about My Damascus. She's a very good storyteller. And after that narration, I will have some questions to ask. And we'll also, of course, take questions from the audience. So on to you, Suad.
Okay, thank you so much, Malini. And thank you, Bill, for the introduction. And Dawood, who's a technician. Really, good morning, everybody. Thank you for waking up early to listen to me. I would like to thank everybody that worked on this fantastic Palestine Rights. My greetings, Suzanne Abul Hawa, who is a close friend of mine, but I know it takes, I don't want to use the word army, but it takes many people, a whole village to do this. So thank you all. As Malin said, I am going to talk about my book, Damascus. I'll tell you a little bit about myself first. I am the daughter of a Palestinian who was kicked out of his house from Palestine. My mother is Damascus, so I was technically born in Damascus. And my parents became refugees in 1948 when 90% of the Palestinian people were kicked out of their homeland, of their houses. And we went to live in Jordan. So I grew up as the daughter of a refugee family in Jordan. And I must tell you that at that time, like most refugees, parents don't try to share a lot with their kids. So they gave them safety, they gave them, they start a new life. So I knew all along that my father was Palestinian, but I must say that my parents did not share with me everything that they have gone through, especially losing their house in Jerusalem. And it was only when I wrote my book, Golda Slept Here, I understood. I asked my eldest sister, who sort of narrated to me what happened in Jerusalem. Now, My Damascus, the book that will be coming out in the spring, thanks to Michel Mshabbik from Interlink. I am very happy that it will be out. He has also published a book for my sister, by the way, Suad Amiry, who also wrote a book on the same family called The Scent of Jasmine. So for me as a child, I must say that I grew up between 2 cities in a way. It's true I was in Amman, but the 2 cities that occupied my mind were both Damascus, which had a lot of presence. It was the safety. You know, being Palestinian, you always feel insecure. I lived between Jaffa, that was lost, and a great loss. I had to listen to my aunt and to my father talking about Jaffa. And as a child, I had to imagine Jaffa from a distance. So Palestine represented loss for me. represented sadness. Jaffa, the same thing, and Jerusalem. While Damascus actually was the anchor of my life, I must say. My mother, who had 4 kids, and she was a businesswoman, she used to get rid of us every summer for 3 months and throw us to Damascus, to my grandfather's house. So I must say that the Damascus beauty stayed with me. I used to say that I became an architect because of the souks of Damascus, the Hamadiyya souk, Zuriyye, all the covered souk, all the mercantile that existed, the gold, the carpenters, the slippers. I remember as a little kid walking in the souk of the slippers that touched my Milana, probably Malini, like India, you know, like these souks are really very rich and they leave great impact. When I went to New Delhi to the market, I remember Damascus. So all of these left an impact on me. So far, I have been writing about Palestine. And actually, this is my only book which is not about Palestine, but in an indirect way, it is about Palestine. Now, having grown up in Jordan, I don't know what to tell you. You know, at one point I felt Jordanian, at one point I felt Palestinian, at one point I felt Syrian, another point I felt Lebanese because I spend a lot of my time. So I could say that I am the product of an Arab world. It's my cultural background. And this book actually, it's a family, as Malina said, it's a family, it's a 3-generation family. I talk about my grandmother and my grandfather, and I'll talk about my parents, my aunts, and then I talk about my cousin who was adopted. And the book actually is about my cousin who has been adopted. So the book has 3 main themes. One is how the Arab world changed, how my grandfather, the trips that my grandfather did at one time as a merchant, moving between Istanbul to Aleppo, Damascus, Trablus, Beirut, Jerusalem, where he met my Nablus, where he met my grandmother, Cairo, Hijaz. It was an open Arab world. And then I move on to my father. My father, who was born in Jaffa and studied at the American University of Beirut. He took a trip from Jaffa to Beirut along the sea, the Mediterranean Sea. A trip that, because of the creation of Israel now, nobody can do that trip. The same thing my mother described to me when she was 4 years old. She came with her mother from Damascus into Arabe, a small village where my grandmother came from. The road that my grandmother took and my mother took in 1926, I cannot take today. Today, I am sitting in Ramallah in a fragmentized Palestine, in a city that I cannot move more than 5 kilometers. So this is one of the themes that I address in the book. The other theme that I address in the book is the woman, because often when you say you're an Arab woman, you're a Muslim woman, you come from the Middle East, you have, or Palestinian, you have layers and layers and layers of stereotyping. Stereotyping of Arab women, stereotyping of Muslim women, stereotyping of Middle Eastern, name it, Palestinian. So for me, this book is really a homage to all the women in my life. And I always say I am a product of this woman. I was called Suad after the name of my eldest aunt who ruled the family. She was really the patriarch, if you want, matriarch of the family. My mother was a very strong character, a businesswoman. So I always say that really this book is also about women in the Arab world. We always think that traditional societies have weak women. Actually, no. Traditional societies have stronger women than what we call modern societies. Believe me, this is my personal experience and it's not an ideological cliche. And the last point that I would like to make is families. The book is really about the complexity of families. In the book, I say one sentence: nobody gives you security and love like your family, but nobody, excuse my word, fucks you up and give you all sorts of insecurities like families do. The book is about two of my aunts, two women, one born in 1898, and one was born in 1900. Two unmarried women decide to adopt a child in the 40s. And one acted as their father, and the other one acted as her mother. And then I don't want to spoil the book for the reader, but I want to say that growing up with an adopted child in the family created a lot of tension, but also created a lot of beauties. And in my mind, it raised the questions of who is a real mother, a biological mother like my mother, or the mother who adopted this cousin of mine, Norma, who had a great love affair. So I stop here, I say, this is three themes. One is the Arab word, the other one is woman, and the third one is really about family. So I'm gonna stop here, Malini, because I warned you that I am a Hakawati and I make it all the time. So I'm gonna stop here and wait for your questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Suad. That was really, really interesting. Your book was fascinating. And like you said, I was really struck by the richness of Damascus. That really stood out for me in the book. How important that city was, how complex it was, the beauty of the house, your grandfather's house, the many layers in the city, and then that journey that you described early on with your grandmother when she goes from Damascus to Arabe. That was beautiful. One of the things I wanted to ask you was that as she is going from Damascus to Arabe, it's a long journey, and she is remembering her mother who has died, or who dies in the course of while she's traveling, and she's looking at the countryside, and as she looks at the countryside evokes memories. And if you go back and forth very beautifully and evocatively between images of the countryside and then what her mother told her. And then she's trying to tell her little daughter who she's carrying with her, look, can you see this? Of course, the child cannot see that. What is the significance of that countryside to your writing, given the fact that Damascus is this complex city? Why is the countryside that important? I really felt that it was, in addition to Damascus.
Okay, thank you. Two important, very interesting questions. Thank you, Malina. Okay, the beauty of Damascus. One thing I want to tell you, that actually this book was a homage for a city, for a country that was in the suffered a lot in the last 10 years. As I told you, as a child, Damascus was my anchor, my safety. And in 2011, when the civil war in Syria started, I felt shattered. Really, I felt shattered that the safety, the anchor of my life is now going through what the Palestinians went through, of being refugees, of being dishomed, misplaced, losing their cities, their homes. At that time, I have spent a lot of time in Italy. I have spent a lot of time in New York, especially in Italy, actually, and in Europe, because many of the Syrian refugees arrived. You know, we always look at refugees as if they have no culture, no music, no home, no food, nothing. And for me, in a way, I wanted to share this beauty of one of the most beautiful cities in the world, right, with the Western reader as well. Saying, you know, these people, these refugees don't come out of nothing. They don't come out of vacuum. These people that you don't respect, these people that nobody leave home willingly. People ask, why did the Syrians leave now? I mean, people leave just when the bomb come on their house. I just felt the irrespect for refugees in general, and I wanted to give them a background of where these people came from. So this was really one of the purposes that, I mean, I always wrote about Palestine because of the loss of Palestine, or loss of the homes, I like to say, more than the country. And Damascus was triggered in me because of the losses again. So this is a homage for the refugees everywhere, not only the Syrians, but also the refugees. Now, the countryside, it's a very good question because two things. Living in Amman, whenever we got to Damascus, I remember we went through part of this landscape, Horan. I remember my dad saying before we entered Damascus that Prophet Muhammad reached here, Al-Qadam, but did not enter because he was afraid of the Syrian merchants. They were too clever. So that landscape, I lived part of it. But the other part, which I describe with my grandmother and with my mother, is the part that most of the Palestinians in diaspora, most of the Arabs cannot see anymore. But also I have a great love for nature, I must say. And I always say, only if the land could talk, we can learn so much. So in my books, you will find there is always a great part of nature and a great part of animals. Maybe in the book of Damascus it doesn't appear, but in every single book, there is nature and animal in my books.
Yeah, the interesting thing was, as you were saying, you wanted to give the refugees and you wanted to give them respect and also show this beauty. What struck me in this book was that it seemed that like you had made a decision, even though you mentioned the Nakba and you mentioned some political events, they are very much to the side. They are not at the center of the narrative. You've made a conscious decision not to dwell on the narrative of loss and expropriation, but to instead dwell on the abundance of Damascus, the abundance of Jerusalem, and the lives of these women. Was that like a conscious choice that you made here?
I don't know, to tell you the truth. You know, we write and then we try to analyze and have other people analyze. But I must say that, you know, as we say, every book we write is about our life in a way or another. This book is also about my life, you know, as having a Syrian mother. I always talked, for obvious reasons, I talked about my Palestinian half. And this is the first time I write about my Syrian half. Mm-hmm. And I think I wanted to share with people what I experienced, because I think it's so wonderful to have different parents from different backgrounds and different classes, if you want. Yes. So in a way, I wanted to share my grandfather's house with everybody, with the readers, basically.
Okay. To shift to something else, this really struck me. You have a lot of really interesting female characters here. Fatima, who is this young woman, she has a child at the age of 11 or
Right.
11, she comes, but she is a feisty woman. Mm-hmm. She is a servant, but she would not allow anybody to refer to her as such. And then there are the two aunts who adopted a child. And then you have just one sentence where you mention that Layla has a female lover. Mm-hmm. But then you don't talk about it at all. And I thought, whoa, I want to know about this female lover. And you just mentioned it. It was, I was expecting, but it was a little bit unexpected. But then you chose not to deal with that at all. Can you just talk about why you decided not to go to that part of the story?
Yeah, actually, it's not that I decided not to go. Just to put the listeners into context. The book is really about women. It's about upstairs and downstairs. Upstairs in the meaning that of my grandparents, my aunts, and the family in which I grew up. But when I wrote the book, actually, for example, Fatima played a very important role in my life, I remember. And I remember she was a vicious, in a way, very tough woman, even though she loved me. I realized actually how little we know about the lives of people who work in our homes.
Yes.
And this also struck me that, you know, we only know them as maids, we only know them as, you know, as people who work in the house, but we never ask about their stories. And actually, the book also reveals the role of, you know, of slavery in the Arab world, something we don't talk about.
Yes.
To have slaves, and basically slaves, because some readers tell me you don't mean slaves, and I say no, I mean slaves. Two of the women who worked came from Saudi Arabia. One was African, obviously, and she used to call herself a gift. She was given as a gift to my grandfather. Yeah, so I meant to mention that dimension in the Arab world, that we have slaves, we have participated, unfortunately, with this sad chapter of humanity, and we take it very lightly when we shouldn't. Now, also in the case of Fatima, who came from Syria, a Syrian who had a very tough life, as a child, I only saw her nastiness. But actually, when you grow up, you are 60 plus years old, writing a book, you want to understand why this person is so nasty, to figure out that she herself was a victim of violence, a victim of marriage when she was 11 years old with a child. So we need to understand people differently when we grow up. And that's what I tried to do, to understand, to give life actually as much as I could for the woman who worked in my grandfather's house. Now, as for my two aunts and one of my aunts, Layla, in which I talk about her woman lover, actually, I wanted to put the reader in the exact position I am in. Mm-hmm. I didn't know more. Many people ask me, but how come you didn't tell us more? I didn't tell you more because I didn't know more. And the book, I didn't want to invent things, but I suspected all along. I heard here and there, but it wasn't talked about, but it was at the same time accepted, because in a way, I talk about these two characters, Insaf and Shahira, in the book. Mm-hmm. And these two women who were lovers, one of them was a relative, another was her partner, and who came to my grandfather's house. And my grandfather was almost a sheikh, actually, you know, wearing one of those. So again, what we think of traditional societies accept a lot. Mm-hmm. And as a child, I saw these two women coming in, eating together, living together, sleeping together. I never thought there was anything to ask about. I just accepted them as they are. No one discussed them. So in a way, also, there are different modes of accepting things. In the Arab world, you might accept homosexuality without talking about it. Mm-hmm. You know that this cousin or this uncle or this aunt is a lesbian, but then, you know, everybody knows, but nobody wants to discuss it. So I use the same mode, actually. I wanted to use the same Middle Eastern mode, where I mention it, but then I don't want to discuss it. Not that I knew much more, by the way.
Right. So to come to that, you mentioned that you wanted to put the reader in the same position because you didn't know more, and you end your. I
don't want to spoil the book for the reader, but be careful, Malina.
Okay. I will.
No, you can ask indirectly. Go ahead.
Okay, but you end up by saying that, you know, I don't know whether these things are true or not. I'm going to leave it to the reader to decide. And you describe your book as a non-fictional fiction or fictional non-fiction. So what's the significance of this genre for you? What kind of possibilities do you see in this particular genre?
Okay, actually, it's a genre, but it's a real one. In other words, I say at the end of the book that there were at least three characters in my life with whom I didn't know when reality started and when fiction started. Fatima was one of them. That maid, that nasty maid who had a
I kind of liked her.
yeah, she was tough. I mean, she
She's
is
very tough.
amazing. She is really amazing. Now, in the book, there is a whole of class thing. There is the class upstairs, downstairs, but you also have the peasants versus the urban. There is a lot of complexity of the social life in which we live. For example, my grandmother who came from Arabi, even though she came from one of the richest families in Palestine, she was still considered a peasant. So there is this whole intimidation of her sister-in-laws. So coming back to Fatima, you find out that Fatima was very, very, very tough. I lost my thread of thought. I must, Malini, tell me your question again. Because
the question was about you're describing the book as a non-fiction fiction.
Yes, sorry. So, because I meander, sometimes I lose myself.
Sure.
I say in the book, there were 3 characters in my life that I never knew the reality from fiction. My mother was one of them. Norma, my adopted cousin, was one of them. And Fatima was one of them. So you really never knew whether they tell you the truth or they are inventing a story or they are evading a story. So I told the reader what I knew. I tried, for example, to get more from my mother at one point, but I couldn't get more. The story that Fatima tells, I don't want to tell it to the reader now, but the story that Fatima tells, which is the crux of the book, we never know whether it was a true story or not. And my mother dies, and everybody dies on me, and I don't know the truth. So I left the reader in the same position. Many readers who have read it in Arabic and Italian, they told me, but this was unfair. We wanted to know more. But excuse me, I really put you in my position, and I am frustrated that these people died on me without me knowing the reality.
Mm-hmm. And you leave us with a secret, and I won't talk about it, so we won't give away the book. But this brings me to the other question. Since you had to find out all these things, what kind of research did you do for the book? What kind of archives did you have to look at in addition to stories that were told to you by your mother and grandmother?
I tell you something about this book. When I wrote Sharon and my mother-in-law, there was one page in Sharon, which was written in 2002, 2003. And so it's almost 17 years ago. My Italian publisher, in the book, I write one page in which my father goes to Damascus to ask for my mother's hand. And he walks into this beautiful mansion, and actually he gets very intimidated. And he says, they're not going to give me this woman, this beautiful woman. So there was one page in which my Italian publisher kept telling me, you know, Suad, this one page is a book for me. I want that book from you. So every time he asked me, but why don't you write the book on Damascus? And I say, I don't know enough. I need to do interviews. I don't know enough about the history, the social history. I need to do research. One day he holds me by the shoulders and he says, Suad, listen to me carefully. I said, what is it? He said, just sit down and start writing, and you will discover how much you know. And I can say thank you, Alberto Rollo, who gave me that advice. Because true, when I sat to write this book, I discovered how much I really knew. So, Malini, what I do is the following. Whenever I write a book, actually I sit down and I write everything I know. I don't go to libraries. I don't do interviews at the beginning. I just put everything I know on the paper. Once I am done with that, because you have to work with the structure, with the chapters and what have you, then I go back and I look at the book. And I say, in this, I need to discuss with my eldest cousin to know more about the love story of my aunt, let's say, blah, blah, blah. In this, I need to talk to my eldest sisters because they know more about Jerusalem and about this and that. I put between brackets, this is, I need to know more. And here, I need to know history more. So I go and read about the period of, let's say, Nasser and the United Syrian Egypt, because as writers, we are not scholars totally. We are not brought up with just to go to the library and start. So I reverse it actually. And I try to fight my scholarly background, I must tell you. And when I write a novel, I say, Saad, don't go to the library now. Go to the library at the very end. And that's what I do. I fill in the blank at the very end. It's the last layer that I put.
It's fascinating, fascinating.
Thank you.
So if you want, I would like to give you the chance. I don't know, you don't want to give the book away, as you said, but is there a passage you would like to read so people get a flavor of the book? Your favorite passage?
No, actually, unfortunately, I am in Italy and I don't have a copy of the book. And I normally, listen, Malini, up till now, I always say I am a storyteller and I am a storyteller and I am not a reader. And so I haven't prepared any reading, I must say. But,
oh, okay, that's fine. But you are a wonderful storyteller. And by the way, anybody who's watching, if you have any questions to ask for Suad, we can take questions, so please put them in the Q&A. I see there are a lot of comments on chat, but I don't see any in the Q&A, so please go ahead and put any question that you want. But so I just wanted to ask you, and I know you have said you don't want to give the book away, but maybe it would be okay for me to ask this question. So some of your descriptions, as you said, you're recounting what is being told to you, but you have such a good imagination. And some of it is, to me, I was laughing as I read the scene where Teta, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, Teta, on a wedding night with Jiddu. Right, and you describe this whole thing with yogurt and kibbeh. And that was, so this whole idea of this very young girl who is afraid on her wedding night, and then suddenly you bring in this narrative, Jiddu says to her, think about yogurt and kibbeh. What made you, can you just describe that a little bit? Because I just had to laugh, and I really enjoyed reading that.
You know, it's funny that you're picking up on this one, because there is a book about lust and love anthology that's coming up, and they picked up this 2 pages from the book about the kibbeh, and it's called the kibbeh, sex as a kibbeh blaban. Okay, 2 things. One of which is the following: that my my teta, my grandmother, was only 14 when she got married, and she got married to my grandfather, who was almost 15 years older than her. And he was like an urban man, a merchant who has been around with experience. So he was like feeling very comfortable during that, the wedding night. And she was, as expected, feeling very intimidated. So I describe how my grandfather is trying to make her to relax a little bit. And, in Palestine, people only know the kibbeh ma'liye, while in Damascus, you have like at least 10 types of kibbeh. And one of them is the kibbeh labaniye, which is yogurt, is cooked with yogurt. And my grandmother liked this kibbeh. She got introduced to it in Damascus. So my grandfather is jokingly saying to her, you see, you didn't know the kibbeh blaban before, and when you tasted it, you wanted more and more. So to encourage her about her wedding night, he says, well, you're going to taste it and you're going to ask for more and more.
So we have a bunch of questions here, and I'm going to just read them since we have just a few minutes, and you can answer them as you see fit. One was, are you working on a new book right now? Have you confronted any challenges with publishing and reception? And then another question, which is a little bit different, is can you talk about the future of architectural conservation in Palestine?
Mm-hmm.
So those, I've kind of put these questions together, and the challenges with addressing Palestine today with so much of support for Israel.
Yeah.
So whether you're working on another book, you're publishing and reception.
Yeah. Okay.
And then architectural conservation.
I am in Italy promoting a new book. There is always a sequence of things. I should tell this to the reader that because Italy was the country that discovered me as a writer, I have a loyalty towards this country. I always thought publishing my books in Italy. Even before Arabic, I write in English. And before they are published in English or in Arabic, they are published in Italy. And so, yes, I have a new book. Damascus was a homage for my mother, for myself, for the refugees. And I am writing a new book, or just came out in Italy. It's called An English Suit and a Jewish Cow. And it is about Jaffa, about my father's city. It's based on a real story. I interviewed two people. One is 88 and one is 92 who lived the Nakba. And based on their story, I wrote this book. So yes, but there is a lack of time. Now Damascus is coming up in America. And I hope in a year or two, which will answer the second book, the second question. Yes, publishing is a problem. Publishing is difficult, I must tell you. Unless you have a publisher who believes in you, it's very difficult to find publishers, especially that publishing, unfortunately, is a business. If they don't feel they're going to make money out of your book, it's very difficult to get your books published. And the competition is very high. So yes, it's not easy. Normally it takes 2 years before you submit a book, before you will, takes a year before you hear from your publisher whether they like it or not. So publishing is a competitive world, and it's not an easy world, I must tell you. Even though I have published 5-6 books so far, but every time I am ready for rejection, I must say. Now for Riwaq, for the reader who don't know me, actually I lived all my life as an architect. And even though I grew up in Jordan in 1981, in diaspora like most of you, in 1981 I got a permit to enter into Palestine and go teach at Birzeit University. And as such, I went and I stayed. What was meant to be 6 months leave without pay from the University Jordan, it had become 40 years now in Palestine. Meanwhile, in 91, I started Riwaq, Center for Architectural Conservation, which basically sees conservation as a way of creating jobs in Palestine. As you know, one of the biggest problems we have in Palestine is the economy, where to find jobs, where to work, not to work in Israel, and all of the above. So Riwaq, I am proud, it's my baby. I'm proud that 30 years ago, I established this organization, and I encourage you all to go into the online and see Riwaq Center for Architectural Conservation. So it's still going, and it's going very well. We have a project called 50 Village Project, in which we are trying to protect 50 villages in order to keep our identity, to create jobs, to keep our history. As you all know, the conflict between Israel and Palestine is not about politics, it's not about religion, it's not about culture, it's not about this, it's not about that, it's about one word: land. Land, land, nothing else, nothing more.
Yeah.
Now, the challenges with Israel. Yeah, unfortunately, we are challenged all the way. I'm happy that at least Trump is gone. Really, yes. I am so happy Trump is gone. Not that I am expecting much. At least we're going to go back to the American position of supporting Israel, blah, 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 but not like Trump, where he and his Minister of Foreign Affairs arrives and declares that 60% of the West Bank is Israeli, and Trump's plan of giving 30% of Jerusalem, Syria, Golan Heights. So the challenges are many. And today, I must just mention one thing. There is a law, an anti-Semitic law, accusing anybody who is criticizing Israel as being anti-Semitic. We should always follow up on this news. Today in Haaretz, there was a news. There is Peace Now, American Peace Now, who had taken a position against this document. This document, if it gets approved, it has been approved by 30 countries so far. There are many intellectuals and writers. We got together, we signed a paper. I'm more than happy to circulate it, in which we say we are not anti-Jewish. We are not anti-anybody. We believe all human beings are equal, regardless of their color, regardless of religion. But you cannot defend the state of Israel, which is an apartheid, a racist country that does not recognize the natives of that country. So be careful of that, because we might be put in a very difficult position if criticizing Israel, meaning anti-Semitism, we are all in a big, big trouble. So please be active on this front. Thank you.
Thank you so much for mentioning that. I think we are about out of time. If you can take like 30 seconds to answer this one question about your relationship with your writing relationship with your sister. Somebody really wanted that answered, and then we will end.
Well, I am happy to belong to a family of writers. Actually, my father was a writer of short stories. And I must say my eldest sister, Anan, started writing before I did. I recall reading her short stories when I was not planning to be a writer. So she was a writer before me, and it's very wonderful because, especially this last book, we both wrote about the same family, but the books are so different. So it's very interesting to see how we perceive the world, whether you are the eldest child, the middle child, the youngest child, or what is it that I focus on, what is it that she focuses on, but she also has a great experience in America. And just a new book came out for her, Anti-Semitic Law, look it up, and talking about her experience in America. So it's wonderful to have friends and sisters who write, so you can share. She always reads my drafts and I read her drafts, and it's wonderful.
Sorry, so I realized we actually have a few more minutes. So there's a
Here
question.
I have Anti-Semitic Law.
Right. This a question from somebody, which is
thank you, Alma. Sorry, Malini. My niece is very gracious. She had put the link of my sister's book online, so look it up.
Perfect, perfect. So there was a question that can you talk about your writing in English, since as opposed to Arabic? Somebody wrote that this is not your first language, and so if you could talk about that.
It's a very good question. I want to tell the reader that Arabic is my mother tongue, and my Arabic is much better than my English, trust me. The thing is the following, that I became a writer by pure accident, just writing emails, as Malini started saying. I wrote emails to my nieces and my family and said, don't share it with anybody. And an Italian friend of mine by the name of Luisa Morgantini shared it with the world. And hence I became an accident by writing in English. Now, the thing is the following, because I became a writer and my first book was translated into 19 languages, it became a sort of a problem or a fact. What happens if I write in Arabic? How are the Italians going to read it? How are the French going to read it? How are the British are going? How am I going to be published again in other languages? So I decided to carry on in English. The other thing I must admit to you, that Arabic is one of the most sophisticated, complicated languages in the world. And when it is your language, you get entangled in the language. And since I mean it, I am a Hakawati, I am not a writer in the sense that I have seen how Suzanne Abul Hawa writes. She picks up every single word. She makes sure that the same word doesn't appear in the same page twice. She has so many eloquent expressions. For me, I am a storyteller. What I care about is for you to know the story I am saying with the simplest words possible, because we concentrate on the story rather than on the, the literature itself, the language itself. Maybe in my last book, I must say, in Damascus and in English Suit and the Jewish Cow, the last book, maybe I started caring more about the language, paying more attention. But this is the story of my English and Arabic writing.
Mm-hmm. Is your book going to be, is My Damascus going to be translated into Arabic?
It's already published in Arabic, actually.
It's already published in Arabic.
Yeah. It's published by Al-Mutawassiti. It's an Arabic publishing house that is located in Milano, of a Palestinian/Syrian publisher who left Syria and came to Europe and started this wonderful, wonderful publishing house, a very, very nice productions, and also he is amazing in distribution, which is a difficulty in the Arab world. So what he does is he publishes a copy for Palestine, another one in Beirut. Now the book is in Baghdad. Today he told me that your Damascus is in the Iraqi Book Festival. So I'm very proud of that.
Mm-hmm. Somebody had asked about the reception of your books, what you hear back, and would be really interested in seeing, what kind of reception you have from Palestinians, from other Arab people, and is there a difference in the reception that you get from people in Europe and North America?
Yeah, okay, great question. Thank you for whoever asked for it, whoever asked it. When I wrote Sharon and my mother-in-law, I must tell you, I was terrified when the Arabic version came, the Arabic edition. And I said, every Palestinian is going to tell me, what is the big deal? We all lived under occupation. We all lived under curfews. We all had mother-in-laws and what have you, because true, I am writing of everyday things. To my biggest surprise, the one community that really supported me everywhere was the Arab and Palestinian community. I can't tell you how many times. Just to tell you a story, I was a graduate of the American University of Beirut in architecture. Mm-hmm. And they only gave me prize when I wrote Sharon and my mother. So the Arab community is amazing. I am so thankful to them. And they are the reason for me to continue writing, because really I don't want to be described as a writer who writes for the West. Right. Because when I write, I don't think of who is going to read my book, because if you start thinking who's going to read your book, you spoil your book, your whatever. You should not be too aware, even though sometimes you cannot help it, but you shouldn't be writing for a writer or for a nation or what have you. Now, the reception of not the Arabs, Palestinians or pro-Palestinians. I'm talking about the average person in America, the average person in Italy. there are differences. I must say that depending on how much they know about the Palestinian question, the Palestinian tragedy, I find that in the Mediterranean, Greece, Italy, Spain, these are my personal experiences, are very welcoming. You can say whatever you want. Nobody's sensitive about anything. In Europe itself, France and Germany are extremely sensitive to what you say, what you don't say. They invite you, but they're nervous. And the presence, Germany is obviously for the historic reasons. And in France, they're extremely over careful. So there are differences. In America, it varies because there is a lot of supporters for Palestine, for the Arab world, and the academia plays a very big role. For example, in America, all the universities, I get invited by universities most. In Italy, I don't get invited by universities. I get invited by reading circles, basically. So it varies. It really varies from one country to another.
Mm-hmm. But you have not received any skeptical or more hostile kind of reception to any of your books, I think.
No, I must tell you the truth, no. And perhaps one of the reasons when I write, I make sure that what I write is 100% correct. Even sometimes I make up stories, I make up descriptions like the wedding of my grandparents. I wasn't there. But when it comes to political or historic facts, I am extremely careful. Right. And by the way, my Sharon and my mother-in-law was translated into Hebrew. And at the time, this was 2004, 5. I talked about it. And of course, the main criticism of the Israelis were, are we in this book? Excuse me, excuse me, it's not about you. It's not about you. It's about you, of course, as occupiers, but it's not about you. So the only criticism I got is like, where are we in all of this? As we know, the Israelis are obsessed of being the center of the world, and they happen to be the Palestinians this time. So this was the only criticism. But I must say that I also received very moving letters. For example, I received a letter from a 17-year-old, 18-year-old Israeli boy who told me, after I read your book, I decided not to join the army.
Whoa.
So there were also bright sides to the story. So these are wonderful stories when they happen to you.
Well, we are about at the end of our time. Suad, thank you so much for joining us. This was a wonderful conversation, and I'm sure that people want to read your books. So if people want to get any of Suad's books, they are at the bookstore, and you can pre-order our Damascus. Thank you so much.
My Damascus.
Sorry, My Damascus. Pre-order My Damascus. Thank you so much. Really
thank you, Malini. Thank you for the 99 people who woke up and listened to me, because I wouldn't wake up to anybody at 10 o'clock.
Thank you so much.
Okay, bye-bye. Bye. Thank you, Malina. You did a great job.
Thank you.